What up? I'm B, and welcome to my channel where we talk about true crime, YouTube drama, current events, all sorts of fun stuff. And today, it's Thursday, so typically we would be doing what I like to call a crafty crime video where I sit here and do a craft, typically crocheting with you, and we talk about something going on in the true crime world, either a serial killer, cult, stuff like that. But since it is Halloween, my first thought was to do a crime that occurred on Halloween, and then I was like, seems maybe a little bit insensitive. So instead, I decided to find some really cool stories on Reddit, and I have two wonderful writers who have agreed to let me read their stories on camera and react to them live. I have not read the stories yet. I've just read the comments, and these seem super interesting. So before we get started, I just want to say thank you so much to MAX-VOYNICH and Mr. Michael SQUID for letting me read your stories. This first one is by MAX-VOYNICH, and the title is I'm a Trucker and I just found a channel on the CB radio that I think was meant to stay hidden. Let's get into it. Are you ready? Okay. I've been a trucker for coming on 15 years now. Whilst some of the new school may have switched to apps or websites to communicate, anyone who's been a trucker for a while sticks to the CB. Perhaps if I'd made the switch, I'd never have been aware of this, the black 571s, the Bible verses, the hunger in the diner, angel. Although I suppose if I had switched, I wouldn't have been there when I needed to be. Today's broadcast ends with a Bible verse they use often, Micah 7:2. The godly has perished from the earth, and there is no one upright among mankind. They all lie in wait for blood, and each hunts the other with a net. Sorry, I should explain what CB radio is. CB stands for Citizen Broadcast Radio. It's essentially a radio transceiver that lives in the front of your truck. You can broadcast and receive on a channel in a roughly 50-mile radius, sometimes more, sometimes less. It's used for all sorts of reasons: alerting other drivers to cops or roadblocks, notifying other drivers about what's going on at certain gas stations or pit stops, arguing about one thing or another, discussing weather conditions and perks of the job. The list goes on. Good to know. Plus, after a week on the road, it's just nice to hear another human voice every now and again. Even if that voice is just telling you there's a Bambi, a dead deer, 30 miles down the road, or their skins, tires, are out, or even just they've won a driving award, been given a speeding ticket. That's fun. I mean, not fun getting a ticket, but like having different words to like the in-group language. Okay. Regular truckers and contributors to whatever channel they're speaking on will have nicknames. This can be to do with the make of your truck or the company you're working for, or even just something stupid you've said once. I suppose, apart from the occasional insider tip, I just like the inane chatter of it. Certain frequencies or channels will be roughly dedicated to a certain topic. There's usually one for chit-chat, one for serious updates, and a local one. I say roughly because they all usually bleed together. The chit-chat refers to local news, the updates end up in political arguments. Sometimes I think about the first day I stumbled across the channel and wonder how things would be different if I'd, like the rest of them, just let it fade away. It's early in the morning and I've already been driving for a couple hours. I'm listening to an argument between two rigs, Rocket and Mollusk, about the black 571s. Rocket says that he doesn't mind them and he doesn't see why everyone's getting so antsy about them. They keep themselves to themselves and don't bother anyone, so why should we bother them? Because they give me the creeps, man. There's a pause, and I'm unsure whether Mollusk has stopped speaking or he's just taking a breath, but then quieter this time. They give me the creeps. I'm kind of on Mollusk's side here. Whilst I don't have anything against the black trucks, something about them doesn't feel right. They roll into truck stops all chrome and matte black with that distinctive giant 571 painted on their side, seemingly out of nowhere. No one really knows where they come from or where they go, and to this day I've never seen anyone get out of one. I've seen a couple get into one, but I'll get to that. I'm about to chime in to give my 2 cents when Rocket brings up something Mollusk said a month ago, and the two are off at it again, arguing like an old married couple. You know those people. For all I know, they could be. And so I start cycling through channels on the CB looking to see if I'm in range for any new local frequencies or if something's kicking off in the news channel when I hear a strange noise. Okay, we're about to get into the creepiness, I bet. I feel it coming. It's something like moaning, and the sound of someone licking their lips, barely perceptibly in the background I can make out a conversation. 2 hushed voices, but it's only for a second before the channel changes again and it's gone. It takes me a moment to process. Sure, you hear some strange shit over the CB, but I've never heard several voices like that before. Curious, I use my free hand to turn the knob, attempting to locate the channel again. Maybe I just caught some commercial radio waves by mistake. It takes a while, maybe 5 minutes, but there it is again. This time for a little longer. I can hear chewing now, noisy, the unmistakable sound of food in someone's mouth, and then giggling from a conversation in the background, a man and a woman's voice. Ew, what? My hand's still on the knob, I listen closer and jump in my seat when another voice cuts through. This sounds like no one from before, and instead is a cold, calm woman's voice reading out a set of numbers. She's ascribing numbers to locations and attaching odd comments and ending with a Bible verse. Sierra 257, Sierra 257, 2 raw, inbound, moving 4 units north, west, Philippians 3:2. It's no trucker code I've ever heard before, but before I can listen to anyone to see if I can figure out what it means, it cuts back to the sound of eating and conversation. Okay, so we got some cryptic messages being sent. Let's see what that's all about. When I try and look at the display to see what frequency the channel is on, the display seems to freeze and the numbers all glitch into 8s. And so with nothing better to do but drive, I listen to the station for the next few hours. They seem to be discussing some sort of import and export, though of what, I'm not entirely sure. They use a code I can't quite figure out, and the cold woman's voice comes roughly every half hour with an update. It's not all business, it seems. As it gets later into the night, the voices over the receiver begin to get weirder. I hear people just whispering in some sort of stream of consciousness in frantic voices. There is one in particular who reads excerpts from various religious texts in a half laugh. I'm pretty sure at one point I heard a group of people having sex, and there's one voice in particular that cuts in and out that sounds like 2 or 3 voices layered over each other, wailing. Creepy. That night, I don't sleep too well. Something about the channel disturbed me. I understand, that's so creepy. It all seemed so real, and there was a sense that there was some sort of structure behind the consistent madness. The whispering voices, the code, the wailing, they all seemed to be trying to communicate something. Although communicate what, I'm not sure. After an hour of tossing and turning in the sleeper cab, I decide to head into the diner at the stop and have a bite to eat, maybe a cup of decaf. On my walk over, I can see several prostitutes in a clump by the men's bathroom. They're having an argument about something, and I stand to watch. There seem to be a couple of younger ones being berated by the oldest. You can tell they're young from the way they stand. There's a vulnerability there, not quite as hard yet. A sense that they can tell this is dangerous, whereas sadly, it seems some of the older women I've seen at stops don't care if they live or die. The 2 younger girls then start arguing amongst themselves. There is a shorter one with black hair and an awful gaudy tattoo of an angel on her leg. The other, taller and blonde, and fishnets that seem to be so ripped it's amazing they stay together. As I approach the diner, I can hear the topic of their argument. It's who goes up to the black 571 that's arrived. Don't go. The tattooed girl is saying that she'd do anything, but she won't do this. And that she knows what happens to girls who get into the black trucks. And the blonde replies saying that it's just a urban myth and tells her to grow up and that she's not in a position to pick and choose anymore. And the way she says anymore makes me think the two girls have known each other for a very long time. And then the blonde girl says, okay, well, I guess I'll just go. And then the tattooed girl is saying, no, please, Mary, don't. Oh, wait. Hold on, I'm not going to interject what I think. Okay. Because it's just a guess. One of the older women gets involved again and slaps the girl with the tattoo so loud I can hear it, but the blonde marches off towards the back of the truck. There's not much I can do, so with a pit in my stomach, I head inside. As I continue to watch through the glass, I can see the tattooed girl's eyes are wet with tears and her mascara is running. She takes a flask from her coat and an older woman starts to shout at her again, but she stares straight ahead like she's used to this. Bosses, supervisors, am I right? She's used to this sort of abuse, and she lets the woman tire herself out and just takes deep sips and tries not to grimace, but I can see her lips curl at the taste. I order a portion of fries and a milkshake for myself. I'm about to pay when I hear the entrance bell ring. I turn and see the tattooed girl stood behind me, arms crossed, her bruised knees knocking together from the cold. The man behind the counter starts to raise his voice at her and says, you gotta buy something here, otherwise you gotta get out. And the girl shrugs as if to say, I've got nothing. And the man raises his voice again, but I step in. I tell him that I'll pay for a burger and a coffee for her and hand over a few notes. She can hear me do this, and I turn to her, but she only offers a half smile in response, as if she's used to men buying her things and wanting something sorted in return. So I make the decision to leave, but as I walk past her, I can't help but blurt out, what's your name? She flinches and grimaces as if she knows what comes next. Silence. I point to her tattoo. Is it Angel? She shrugs again, but this time speaks. Can be. And with that, I leave. That's the last I see of Angel for 3 months. I spend those months obsessing over the secret CB channel. I have to spend about 15 minutes every morning finding it, and more often than not, after tracking it down, it slips away. The connection is often faulty, but with enough time and dedication, I eventually settle on it. I've heard of number stations, government-controlled radio stations that were supposedly transmitting messages to spies behind enemy lines using codes or something like that, but this feels different. Sure, there's a code that I haven't been able to crack, but there also seems to be a community. It was about after a week that I realized it's the same two voices who just whisper into the microphone, and even though it's almost impossible to hear what they say, I often catch snippets of Bible verses or words that make me think they're trying to talk to someone. There are voices that hold brief, if confusing conversations, voices that seem sophisticated in some way. The sex continues as well, although it sounds like different people each time, often in large groups, replete with smacks and gasps and screams. They'll often discuss one truck stop in particular, somewhere in the country, although I'd never been close enough to go and check it out. But something about it is undeniably sinister. It's nasty. Often someone might broadcast screams or someone crying, and the unmistakable sound of something striking flesh. Hard. And once or twice, I've heard in the background of various broadcasts voices pleading, people begging. Their voices shaking and muffled. Perhaps I'm weird for being so obsessed with it, but it became an addiction. I could find no trace of it online, and no one I'd talked to at truck stops seemed to have any idea what I was talking about. But I'm sure that there's something behind it all. I'm determined to figure it out. It was a few days ago that luck was on my side. The stop mentioned in the broadcast was only half a day's drive from the stop I'd planned to stay at, and so without a moment's hesitation, I turned my truck around and started making my way there. I'd tell my employer I'd blown a tire or something, and worst came to worst, they'd just dock my pay. I had to know. I pulled up to the stop in the early evening, and not much seems out of the blue. So I parked my truck and wait. I listen to the channel, but make sure to turn down the volume. Even though I'm sure nothing's wrong, something about the idea of being found listening to it when I'm sure I'm not meant to be gives me a deep sense of anxiety. The voices get clearer as the evening goes on and the static begins to die down, as if everyone on the channel is zeroing in on my location. Ooh, can you imagine that? Like, you're just parked in by yourself in the middle of the night, and it starts getting, like, you're listening to a radio station, it gets louder and louder and louder. For some reason, this begins to panic me, and I consider leaving, just driving off and pretending like this had never happened, throwing out my notebooks and just spending the rest of the year listening to the radio like a normal person. But I've come this far, and I just can't bring myself to do it. People come and go in cars and trucks, but no one particularly out of the ordinary. But as the sun sets, I spot a familiar face. In a group of 3, Angel walks to the front of the men's bathrooms and lights a cigarette. Her blonde friend isn't with her. Even from this distance, I can see that she looks older, thinner. Her face seems gaunt, and there's a new stiffness in her posture. She's not as receptive to what the others are saying, and clenches her jaw, staring into the distance. She doesn't look strung out currently, but she's changed in that way addiction changes you, makes you harder, makes you retreat within yourself so that your eyes lack life and look like dull globes instead. I feel weird just sat here in my truck, so I decide to walk into the diner at the stop, half trying to catch Angel's eye as I walk past to see if she'd recognize me, but she stares straight ahead as if I was a ghost. Upon entering the diner, I can tell something's wrong. The AC is more than cool. It's cold, and everyone turns to look as I come in, a sea of pale faces watching me as I walk to the counter. I ask if they do coffee, and a woman pours me a mug and points to a free seat. As this is happening, I can see black 571s start to fill the parking lot up, one after another, like metal beetles in the night. But no one gets out, and instead the patrons of the diner seem to get excited, shifting in their seats and gazing out the window hungrily, some biting their lips or rubbing their thighs under the table. No thank you. I start to think this might be a bad idea. I have no idea what's actually in those trucks and what this station is for, but I know it can't be good. And I think that this was all a stupid idea and try to figure out why I feel so strange, so out of place in this diner. I think about it as I watch Angel walk towards the back of a 571. I think about running out of the restaurant and telling her not to, shaking her and telling her to stay away. But what would I say? That I'd met her once before, months ago, and she shouldn't go into a black 571 because they gave me the creeps? I had no evidence that the 571s and the channel were connected, and even if I did, what would that mean? And so I watched, with a sinking feeling, as she strode to the back of the truck, rubbing her nose. It was as Angel disappeared from view that I realized what had been making me so uncomfortable, what had been making me feel so strange in this diner. Looking around, I realized that I was the only one with a cup of coffee. In fact, I was the only one who'd actually bought anything. Everyone else was sat silently with a plate and knives and forks in front of them, but there wasn't a single speck of food anywhere. They were waiting and watching the window, hungry. I could feel their eyes on me too, and I knew then I had to get out of there. The woman behind the counter noticed me looking at everyone's plates and began to walk around the counter towards me, and she nodded at a man near the back who stood up and must have been nearly 6'5", and he too started to make his way slowly towards me, and so I stood up, walking as fast as I could without making it obvious, straight across the lot and into my truck, where I sat for a moment catching my breath. Something made me jump. A loud, frantic thumping on the door to my truck. Bang, bang, bang. My heart was racing now, beating so fast that I could hear and feel it in my chest, and I debated just turning the engine on and just driving, thinking about what could be on the other side of that door, but then I heard a voice. Please. A voice I recognized, and I leaned over and threw the door open, and it was Angel. Her face bruised and covered in blood, and in an instant she clambered up and into that seat next to me and slammed the door shut. Her clothes are ripped, and through one rip I can see what looks like red bite marks on her arm. And her eyes were wide with terror, and she held a scalpel under my chin, which felt wet with blood, and she told me to drive, and so I did. It takes an hour of driving, coasting on pure adrenaline, before I try and ask what happened. She says nothing. She's just sitting there, quiet. She says nothing. I tell her that I'm not the threat here and I won't hurt her, and that maybe she should take the blade away from my neck, but she says nothing. And the blade stays exactly where it is and doesn't move for the next few hours as we drive under the cover of darkness. Slowly, the first rays of sun begin to creep over the horizon, and moving my hands inch by inch, I reach for the buttons for the commercial radio. She says nothing, but in my peripheral vision, I see her give the tiniest of nods. I turn it on, and what I think is an old Nina Simone record begins to play. It's the first noise, except the sounds of the road and of the truck, either of us has heard for hours. And so we drive like that, her holding a scalpel to my neck and my hands on the wheel, listening to the radio as America unfolds in the dawn before us. What? Oh my gosh. Okay. First. What? That was a really cool setup. I think there is a part 2 to this story. I'm pretty sure there is. So that was super suspenseful. I'm freaked out. If there's a part 2, I want to know what the rest of it is. So if you are interested, definitely let me know and we can read part 2 next week. But I really liked it a lot. Okay, so next, let's go ahead and move on to Mr. Michael Squid's story. I haven't recovered. Give me a second. I need some hot chocolate. Give me a second, and then we'll get into it. Okay, so this next one is called Uncle Leonard's Disturbing Sideshow, and it is by Mr. Michael Squid. Let's get into it. My Uncle Leonard was the oddball black sheep of the family. We'd only get a glimpse of him at funerals. He'd show up with a wide smile checkered with stained and missing teeth, his whiskey breath lingering in the air before him. Thin wisps of gray hair nested on his wrinkled head, which poked comically out of his gaudy plaid jacket. My mom always said he had a screw or two loose, but I loved his crass jokes, strange and paranoid theories, and odd appearance. He was a janitor at some large facility with a bit of an alcohol problem and was the last thing on my mind until a few days ago. My mother called to tell me he wasn't returning phone calls or texts regarding the planning of her 60th birthday. Rude. After trying him on the phone, she found his Facebook page had lacked any updates in weeks. She called her cousins, but nobody had heard from him. Since I lived closest, she asked if I could check in on him. I was recently heartbroken and single, failing out of college, and dealing with the haze of lingering depression. I was not only free, but in need of a break from my wallowing in misery, so I agreed to visit. When Friday rolled around, I drove out to the sticks to Leonard's house. It was a dilapidated, one-story home that looked abandoned. His boxy Chevy Caprice, rusted and peeling from neglect, sat on deflated tires. It meant he should have been home. Fall leaves piled up from the rusty gutters and onto the sagging roof, missing half the shingles. The dead grass looked like a cemetery of toothpick tombstones. A sun-bleached green plastic mailbox leaned at a 45-degree angle, maw agape and spewing old mail. I took a deep breath and exited the car, walking over on cracked paving stones framed by weeds to the unwelcoming front door. I realized for the first time Uncle Leonard had lived in absolute squalor. That's so sad. The windows were black and speckled with dust and dirt with no clear view inside. After a quick rap of my knuckles on the door, I reminded myself to wash my hands thoroughly as soon as possible. No answer. I knocked harder, calling out, "Hello?" No reply. I peeked into the dark windows, wiping at the dunes of dust in each dark pane with my jean jacket sleeve to try and see within. "Hello, Uncle Leonard." I called out and knocked again, harder still. The force of my pounding knuckles pushed the creaking door inward. I immediately coughed from the sour air that suddenly escaped the residence. Ooh, creepy. We're creepy right away. I pushed the heavy door fully open and was met by the foul ammonia odors of urine and suffocating staleness of mildew. He was a hoarder. That much was clear. The place was filled with buzzing flies and piled dishes, filled with fuzzy, molded food waste. Soggy newspaper stacks and mildewy mounds of damp clothing gradated the dreary color spectrum from green to gray. I made the rounds, squeezing past piled garbage, trying not to touch the furry growths of speckled molds that reached out from every surface. I covered my nose and mouth with my sleeve to reduce the miasma of sour air as I continued further into the maze-like mess of junk. I saw no sign of Uncle Leonard as I squeezed by mountains of trash, but I noticed a cracked door leading down into the darkness of a basement. "Sir, don't go there." I pushed the creaky door open and peered down the stairs into the blackness. Flecks of old lead paint drifted to the floor like ash as I pulled the door open. My fingers felt around before landing on the switch on the wall. But after a few fruitless flicks, it was clear the bulb had burned out. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The beam of light, swimming with floating motes of dust, barely lit the rickety stairs descending down. There was a light source down in the darkness out of view below. I stepped down into the darkened cellar, curiosity filling me as well as unease. A plastic faux wood-grain box from the 80s I recognized as an old slide projector sat on the armrest of an ancient couch that was crumpled and stained. The projected slide illuminated a concrete wall with a rectangle of light, displaying the image of a playground. I coughed as I walked to the couch, to a kinked black wire leading to a simplistic controller resting on a filthy cushion. "Are you down here?" I called out, aiming the light on stacked boxes to cast stark shadows. Old standing lamps, stacks of 70s and 80s board games, and old books formed pillars within the labyrinth of junk. I turned back to the projector, the only immediate clue before me, and picked up the wired plastic controller as I approached the 5x7 projected photo of a playground. I pressed down on the forward button. Click. The plastic carousel rotated. Between slides, the basement went black and cold momentarily before another old photo replaced the playground on the wall. The blurry photo showed a woman pushing a stroller in the playground. Out-of-focus leaves blurred dark green in the foreground, and I soon realized the photo was taken from behind the cover of bushes in a clandestine manner. My stomach squirmed as I pressed forward on the control, and darkness consumed the basement between slides. Click. A new image showed that same woman, likely the mother, leaning over a crib and tending to her child. The voyeuristic nature of the photos made my skin crawl. The photos had been taken after sneaking into the house. That much was certain. It seemed clear my uncle had been stalking this woman at first, but then a creeping dread shivered me at a realization. He wasn't stalking the woman, but her child. Ew, I got chills. Dark curiosity guided my shaky thumb, which rattled the cheap plastic forward button as I pressed it down once again. Click. The photo from above the shirtless toddler lying down on a plastic-wrapped mattress in the same basement I soon recognized by the shape and concrete walls. It was the basement I was in. My skin crawled with horripilation. The photographed child faced away from the camera, but their spine seemed malformed as if from a severe form of scoliosis. Behind the small figure was a metal cage, the kind used to crate dogs. A padlock hung from the gate. My throat closed as dread grew at the unfolding scenario. "Oh my God," escaped my dry throat in a rattled whisper. Almost immediately, in response to my voice, I heard a faint rattling of metal from inside the dark, cluttered basement. I wasn't alone down there. "Hello?" I called out, spinning towards the sound with a low-powered LED from my phone. Past stacks of refuse and dismantled shelving, I saw a small cage. My heart became heavy and cold as it sank into my chest. I could see the form inside. There was a small child inside the cage. Time slowed as I walked closer to the small metal enclosure. I averted my gaze from the shirtless body of a frail child within, holding up small hands to block the light of my phone. The foul odors or bodily waste grew stronger as I approached. Oh my God, hang on, I'm getting you out," I called to the child. A saliva-filled wheezing soon became punctuated with coughs. The child was choking. I grabbed the padlock with shaking hands as my heart pounded in my chest. I breathed out in relief. A small rusty key was still in the lock. I turned it with a click and slipped the padlock from the latch. I opened the cage door, looking in the dark confines of the crate to the cowering child inside, extending a hand. But soon I recoiled backwards as the kid looked up. Something was wrong with their face. It was that uncanny valley effect of something mimicking a person but not quite nailing it. I then realized the child was wearing a mask. A closer look caused me to cock my head in confusion when I realized it was from my CPR training for my lifeguard job. Okay, this is scary, but this reminds me of The Office when Dwight has the CPR dummy mask on. Okay, anyway. It was the rubber face of a little junior CPR mannequin. The child coughed, and I heard the muffled pops of cartilage in joints as long arms unfolded from behind the cowering form. Unfolding limbs bent in unnatural ways, and the poking spine twisted under skin too small to contain it. My dread about the child's well-being shifted into immediate concern for my own. I rose and stepped back slowly from the open cage. My heart pounded as I cowered in the shadowy cover underneath the stairs. I felt the floor cling to my sneaker with an adhesive stickiness unseen in the shadows, but covered my mouth with my hand to silence my breath. I heard wheezing breaths and the patter of damp feet on the cement floor as that thing crawled from its confines in the basement, sniffing and gurgling. I smelled it then. The stench of bodily decomposition that wafted up after my sneaker broke the congealed seal of unseen remains underfoot. I looked down into the dim space as my eyes struggled to make out the form of a person. A crumpled corpse lay in the recesses of the nook with me, wearing an oversized plaid suit. It was Uncle Leonard. My mind spun in horror, as I only then understood he'd kept this child thing down there in the cage for a reason. The click of joints called my attention back to the cage, to the unfolding form of something far too tall and strangely shaped that was squeezing its way out the small window near the exposed beams of the ceiling. It had escaped the basement. I stayed in the hiding place a few minutes to make sure it wasn't returning before I finally breathed. I nervously approached the slide projector, nagged by the urgent need to understand what that thing was that I'd released. A lump developed in my throat as I continued the slideshow of photos that painted a truly disturbing picture. The next few shots were blurry action shots of that thing feeding. A shocking tableau of misshapen things only slightly reminiscent of children lit up the wall. There were more of them. Different childlike things with different abnormalities that made my skin crawl. Unhinged jaws and 2 sets of beady black eyes on one, slender limbs that folded and split into narrower and increasingly branched appendages on the other. Paperwork marked confidential was photographed on the subsequent slides, bearing the logo of the facility Uncle Leonard had worked at. The documents were littered with foreign terms such as SCNT, gRNA, and genome editing. I needed to look up terms related to the cloning and genetic engineering. The anxiety tensing my muscles and spinning my mind crescendoed when I clicked forward. My knees buckled, dropping me to the filthy couch. The next slide was an old photograph of a boy getting his blood drawn. A boy that looked just like me. Nope. Don't like that. Ooh. Ew. Okay, so that's so creepy, first of all. Second of all, are we getting more? Like, I feel like I said that for the last story too. I'm like, oh, that's so creepy. Like, yeah, it's meant to be creepy, but still, reading it, ooh. Okay, so I need to know, where did he go? First of all, where did the unfoldy thing, the Mr. Glow Sticks, like crackles, where did he go? And also, did they, like, use your DNA to make these? Why? Ugh. Is that why you, like, always liked your uncle? Because you guys had, like, a special bond and he liked you the most too? Weird. Weird but good. That was super, like, that was suspenseful the entire time. Like, you had, like, 2 paragraphs and got right into it. That was super good. So, well, those are both very spooky, and I hope that you enjoyed them. This is from the Reddit thread No Sleep, and again, thank you so much to Max and Mr. Michael SQUID for letting me use your stories. Like I said, in between telling these two, their links to their original stories are going to be in the description, so if you liked them, go over there, tell them they're amazing, tell them they're creepy and twisted, and you like the way that their brain works, because I'm sure they would love to hear it. So, yes, again, thank you to them, and let me know. I'm going to see if there's anything, like, continuing on this, if there's a part 2 for anything like that, and I'm pretty sure there is a part 2 for the first story about the CB radio, so please let me know down in the comments below if you want to hear the part 2, if you want to read it together, and also let me know if you liked this and if you have any other types of creepy stories that you would want me to read and react to. That's all I've got for this one. All right. We did it, guys. Good job. We made it through 2 scary stories. Have a happy Halloween. With all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Please, I would love it so much if you would like or subscribe to this channel, and if you have subscribed already, thank you so much. I'm so appreciative of you, and I love being able to just hang out and talk about whatever. Now, go out there and be the voice of reason in a world full of crazy. Bye.